as an empty space or an empty time. There is always something to see, something to hear. In fact, try as we may to make a silence, we cannot. John Cage. This is a quote that was said by her idol. An artist that uses sound as her primary medium. Farah Mullah finds innovative ways to tackle social problems using auditory experiences.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Farah Mullah, and my job is to make sense of things people can't see. I'm also terrified of speaking in public, so we're just going to do a little exercise. If you could all please stand. While we're doing this exercise, I would request you to suspend all internal thought and try to focus your awareness towards the sounds that are happening around you. All right? Everybody ready? We're going to start by rubbing our palms together. And then we're quickly going to snap our fingers. Doesn't that sound like the rain? We're going to rub our thighs. We're going to generate some heat again with our palms and place that on our eyes. And take a couple of deep breaths. All right. You can take your seat now. So, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and kids. It's tough being a kid these days, the amount of career options that you have. While I was growing up, I remember my teacher asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told her that I wanted to be a penguin. Obviously, that didn't work out for me very well. Like most people, I grew up listening to a lot of music. My grandfather used to listen to a lot of Indian classical music, while my dad used to listen to a lot of Western classical music. And on the days when we were lucky, they would settle on a middle ground and make us listen to whale sounds on the record player. I studied science in university because that was the line of thought that was the most relatable for me. That was the most relatable for me at that point. And yeah, I'm getting nervous, sorry. That was the most relatable to me. And while I was in the second year of my master's in geology, I started to realize that it wasn't providing me with the kind of creative outlet that I needed. So I decided that I'm going to find that outlet, and I went on to study fine art. It sounds very easy right now, but it wasn't as easy. But it provided me with the opportunity to explore and find that creative outlet that I needed. I went on to study fine art at Cambridge School of Art, and that's when I came across this man called John Cage, who's basically my hero, and he changed my life. He sort of brought me back to these whale sounds that I grew up listening to, and he equipped me with the vocabulary to not only understand and comprehend it, but to express it in my own way. So when I say sound, I don't just mean music, which is basically organized sound. I mean everything that vibrates, including silence. Now, the human ear has an auditory spectrum of 20 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz. Everything above and below that makes sound as well. It's just not receptible by the ears. So there clearly is no such thing as silence. Sound is a kind of energy, and energy is something scientists even today baffle to define. And we go back time and again to what the Greeks said about energy. Basically, it was something that was at work. Can you imagine all the advancements in technology and science, and we're still stuck to define something like that? The sound gets more interesting after that. It has no material of itself. It has no physical qualities of itself, but yet it speaks about materiality. It is our most primal means of self-defense, and we are always immersed in it. We have eyelids and no earlids, so we're always immersed within sound. It is one of the first senses to develop, even as early as 3 months old in your mother's womb, and it's one of the last ones to pass when we die. So this was the point of departure in my research during my time at Cambridge. When I came back, I found myself having years of learning, to very different degrees, and no job category to fit in, and even more questions than I started off with. And it was a confusing time. I was a little lost, and I was considered jobless at that time. And it was during that time that I realized that I was a researcher, not just by choice, but by default. It made me happy to learn new things and find out creative and meaningful ways, to apply this research. And creativity is a phenomenon whereby something new and valuable is created. Creativity is also folding a paper plane and to make it fly further. Creativity sometimes is also inventing a job category for yourself when you don't have one. So, anyways, I'm a creative researcher, and my research is about how sound affects human subjectivity and our sonic experience. Over the years, my research has taken different outlets and different forms. Sometimes it's art installations in museums and galleries, sometimes it's writing for journals, sometimes it's making a movie soundtrack, to sometimes it being making adaptive devices. So I'm going to take you through some of these outlets of mad creativity that happen. This is windschatten. Windschatten basically just translates to a wind window. This installation was made in the quaint little village of Kalga. Kalga basically has no locals, and its economy comprises of 4 hostels at the time, and a lot of plastic waste is generated as a byproduct of that. This is a kinetic installation, which means that it interacts with the wind. The ambient wind intensity and direction of the wind activate the structure to produce a sonic response. So what we did was we went around collecting 1,000 used and discarded plastic bottles, and we cut, cleaned, and shaped them, and we tuned them to generate a sonic response. It is sort of a visual and architectural response to, it's a metaphor for the cycles of waste and consumption that's going on everywhere around the world these days. So this is what it sounded like. Sorry about that. This is Translat. So this was a piece that I did in Oslo a few years ago. It's basically using the human voice as sonic graffiti. We're going to pass around this piece in a few baskets. Some of the volunteers will be coming out with it. So basically, each code is transcribed with a recording, which narrates the idea of basically, the recordings and narratives of people who have relocated, and they're narrating their experience of relocation via landscape and sound. These codes weren't placed in a gallery. These codes were basically distributed all over the city of Oslo, on the trams, the buses, the ferries, and while these codes narrated different people's stories of migration, they were migrating themselves. And I think the most happiest moment was that when I found that a code traveled until Alaska. I can track by these access, by the way. So English was used as a standardizing language because it reveals and conceals people's identity as a language, as a marker of identity. So we're going to have a listen to Karan Shahdev.
Where do I call home? That's the interesting question. I've lived in about 5 different countries across 3 continents. And each one of those places, I believe, has impacted me in a certain way. But at the same time, I don't know if I can consider any one of them home. The place that I live now, I've lived only a year. So it's probably the shortest amount of time I've lived in a place outside of my homeland. So I don't think a year is long enough for me to feel at home here. I don't feel not at home. I don't feel rejected. I don't feel like I don't belong. I just don't feel like I'm home. It's not because I don't think I belong there. I just feel like I've outgrown it. Thinking back, I recently went back to the country of my birth and lived there for 2 years, 2.5 years. And it's probably the most uncomfortable I've felt. The place that is most not like home for me. A place that I had no real connection to. I've outgrown the cultures. Well, I could even say that I never even adopted the culture in the first place since I left when I was 4 years old. So it was very much a culture shock going back when I was 27 years old. And if you can't call the place you were born home, where can you call home?
Coming a few years ahead, I came across this thing called sound therapy that intrigued me. And sound therapy basically works on a premise that disease is an imbalance within your body, and that you can use sound to tune your body, very much like a musical instrument. While I was researching about this and while I was studying about it, I was told that it can cure cancer. And that was a very tall claim for someone like me. And I needed some qualitative and quantitative analysis, some facts and figures to prove that it was right. I had the opportunity to do that, and I collaborated on this project with a colleague of mine, Christian Hofstadter. Christian Hofstadter is a brilliant man. Basically what he does is makes these EEG machines, and you can track your brain activity while this is going on. So during the sessions, we had mortals. Mortals are people who had volunteered for the study. And the mortals had fallen asleep, so they claimed to have fallen in deep sleep. But we found out that their brains were as active as, in the middle of the day during the study. We still have a lot of data to unpack from this. And while we were working on it, there were these 2 directors who came up to us, and they were really interested in the kind of research I was doing. And they were making it on ASMR. ASMR is basically autosensory meridian response. It is the feeling of pins and needles at the back of your head when you listen to a particular kind of sound or visual stimulus. We ended up making the documentary together, and it premiered at London Film Festival the last year. Also, coming back to whether or not sound therapy cures cancer, I still don't know. But what I do know about it is that if in this day and age, if somebody can relax for 5 minutes, it's worth it. So this encouraged me to, what more could be possible with this sort of research? And it sort of brought me back to my friend's school. Shruti More, she runs Samfya Foundation in Kulu, Himachal Pradesh. Samfya Foundation works towards building an inclusive world for people with diverse abilities. There are kids who come in with autistic spectrum disorders and cerebral palsy, and they're really nurtured in this school. And I used to go there and visit her time and again. And I started to wonder how I could apply what I know to help these kids in a way. I don't know if it's still helping them, but I hope it does. So I started making these adaptive devices using sound. So everybody learns at a different pace and in their own way. And learning doesn't only happen in a classroom or doesn't rely on a particular sense. You learn via different receptors. You can learn via sound, you can learn via touch, you can learn via taste. So that's how we generate our memories, and that's how neuroplasticity comes into place, basically. So what I have done is I basically just took a plank of wood, placed all these latches. Now a lot of these kids, it's very difficult for them to even, hold something or move something from one point to the next. So this sort of keeps on training them, keeps their hands busy, and, sort of helps them out in making different connections, and it entrains their brain. पसंद है संगीत?
काउंटिंग भी करो साथ में।
Sangeet couldn't hold anything a few years
देख रही हूँ
ago.
मैं।
This is Himani. This is another device that I ended up making. So this is Himani has no faculty of speech yet. She's older, but we're trying to get her to play and trying to make her to mimic the sounds via the sense of touch. So this is her interacting with the contraption that I came up with. So, as you might have realized, I worked a lot with sensory overlaps and technological overlaps. Now, this installation is basically an immersive sensory simulating installation. Basically, what it does is it picks up sounds of people entering into this space, and it simulates a visual response to it. So, the tone and the intonation of your voice, it makes the patterns change within the structure, and the volume increases the brightness of the structure. The idea was to generate a synesthetic experience, and it is upside down. Can we play this? Crosstalk explores these sensory overlaps, and it speaks about how harmony might not be present in our environment, but is fabricated by our cognition. The meaning of sound is often invested in the object that created it, and we put these objects together in order to form a narrative. I'm still very unsure about a lot of things, but I do know two things for sure. One is that the mind is a beautiful thing, whatever it thinks it becomes. And the other is that you should never, ever underestimate the value of an idea. My name is Farah Mullah. Thank you for listening.